Good morning. And we are so glad that this group has come together and that these prosecutors recognize our proposals for what they are. These are common sense solutions that begin to pick away at 400 plus years of structural oppression and criminalization of Black people in this country. This is not about anti-law enforcement. Let me repeat, this is not about anti-law enforcement. This is about being anti-abuse of power, about being anti the killing of Black people in this country. Just last week, with the video from Fairfax, we saw that Virginia is not immune to abuse of power or to the executive excessive use of force against Black people. In fact, the data shows that even though African Americans make up 10% of the population of Fairfax, they make up 50% of the instances of use of force during arrests. That's just Fairfax. Now is the time to be proactive, not reactive. So these common sense solutions that's being proposed by the Senate Democratic Caucus are instances where we are trying to be proactive in putting together solutions to the problem, not reactive. Just because George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor were not Virginians doesn't mean we don't have our very own homegrown problems here in Virginia. This was the capital of the Confederacy. These are not problems that materialized overnight, and they will not be fixed overnight. We have our work cut out for us, and we are looking forward to making progress here in Virginia during the special session. And we are so happy that we have individuals who are willing to work with us toward these solutions. And we thank you so very much to these prosecutors who are willing to work with us. So I will now turn it over to Scott Surville for some remarks.
Hi, my name is Scott Surville. I'm the state senator for the 36th Senate District. I represent Fairfax, Prince William, and Stafford counties, and I'm also an attorney, and part of my practice is criminal defense. And I want to thank, like our caucus chairman, also thank the Commonwealth attorneys who were on our call today and those who signed the letter supporting our plan and the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus's plan last week. I just want to make a couple points about this overall plan. First of all, I just want to make clear that from our caucus's perspective, and I think from everybody on this phone, on this call's perspective, this issue is about more than policing reform. While a lot of the things that happen on the street you see on the video cameras, there's things that happen in the courthouse every day that don't happen on a video camera, and they happen day after day after day that systematically cause probably 80–90% of the problems that you see, both in the courthouse and out in the prisons. And that's why this session needs to be about more than policing reform. It also needs to be about reforming our criminal justice system, all the way from when the arrest happens to when people are released from prison. The policies that we've proposed as a caucus, and I believe those that the Commonwealth attorneys have proposed, are common sense. Many of them, if not all of them, well, not all, but many of them are policies in other states. We're not treading any new ground here. These are things that have already been done in other places and that work. In fact, many of the policies that we have proposed have actually been adopted in many Virginia jurisdictions and by many Virginia law enforcement agencies. Many agencies do not train chokeholds. Many agencies do not train their officers to shoot into moving vehicles. Many departments train de-escalation techniques, but we have over 400 law enforcement agencies in Virginia, and we need to raise the baseline standard for all of them. We also need to correct decades of bad policy, which have now chiseled systematic racism into our policing and criminal code, which happens to be applied in our courthouses. I'm not blaming our judges. I'm not blaming our prosecutors. They're applying the law, and the law, as written, has big problems. Too many mandatory minimums, too little discretion for both judges and prosecutors and juries. And that is why we have broad support for this proposal. You're going to see support coming out from folks, advocates in the mental health community. You're going to see advocates in the civil rights community. I think you're going to see bipartisan support for some of these proposals. And I'm happy that we have 11 Commonwealth attorneys now supporting this who represent about 45% of the population of the state. These proposals are going to give our prosecutors the flexibility they need to render justice. It's going to allow them to focus their limited resources on the crimes that cause the most harm, that are the biggest priorities to our residents. And they're going to result in more effective rehabilitation, less recidivism, and that's going to be better for everybody. We honor having their support of our plan, and we look forward to the House of Delegates and the governor coming over to our side as well. And having said that, I'm going to turn it back to our caucus chairman. I don't remember who's next.
We'll now turn it over to, I believe it is.
Is it Stephanie?
No, is it Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So thank you to the members of the delegation who are here for the work that you have done and for standing up to listen to the collective cries around our nation for transformative change. We are over 40%, we represent over 40% of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we are unified in seeking transformative change in every area that we identified in our letter. But I'm specifically to speak about police accountability, which is something that has been very important to me and my community for the entire 5+ years that I've been in office and before. Quite frankly, we have to acknowledge as prosecutors that we are a part of a system that is engaged in systemic and institutional racism and injustice for longer than any of us can remember. And so the letter says that we are in support of all police accountability, all reform related to police accountability in the use of force and misconduct and other behaviors related to complaints. So that includes the requirement to allow prosecutors unrestricted access to police reports, information, disciplinary records of all officers and all matters before the court. And we also, many of us are in support of duty to intervene, as well, as we have seen around the nation, the trouble and the problem and the heartbreak that ensues when officers do not intervene when bad acts are taking place. And so I know I only have 60 seconds, but I do have to say that I want to emphasize the word all. When we say that we are in support of all police officer accountability reform, that means all. And so all of the efforts that are being taken, again, we are grateful for. We stand in support of, and we stand firmly behind the transformative change that is a matter of life and death for communities of people who look like me and my family. So thank you for all that you're doing, and I will pass it along to the next person up, who I believe is Anton Bell, my colleague from Hampton.
Good morning. So my name is Anton Bell, I'm Commonwealth Attorney for the City of Hampton, and I'd like to thank the delegation and my colleagues who stand with me concerning these proposals. And so another point that we are going to advocate is a requirement that all warrants be served during the daytime, and that would include a knock and announce provision with additional showing to a judge, not a magistrate. So for nighttime service, we are asking that there's going to be an additional showing for that person to go to a judge and not be able to secure that warrant from a magistrate. In addition to that, we are also stating that there will be no longer any no-knock service. So many of you are familiar with the Breonna Taylor killing that took place, where a young lady was killed in the nighttime while she's sleeping in her bed. And so we're saying enough of that. We're not going to be reactive to a similar situation in Virginia. We're going to be proactive. So we want to eliminate the possibility of a Breonna Taylor taking place here in our Commonwealth. So we're asking for the elimination of any no-knock service. And if there is going to be any type of service at nighttime, there has to be additional showing to a judge and not a magistrate who will have that skill level to be able to truly assess the danger prone or factors that is associated with that. And so I'll turn it over because I know I only have 60 seconds. So I'll now turn it over to my colleague from the Loudoun County Commonwealth Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Anton. This is Buta Biberai, and I am the Commonwealth's Attorney for Loudoun County. And I do also want to thank our elected, the members of the delegate, and my colleagues who are all of the like-minded being progressive prosecutors. And this is what that means. And that is for us taking the lens as to what is the harm that our laws and how we impose those laws are affecting our communities. So that's what we're looking at. We're not trying to be light on crime, as some people are trying to say, but we're actually trying to figure out what is the harm that our system is causing to our citizenry. I am speaking on a specific issue as to the automatic and also the required license suspension of 6 months for any sort of drug possession offense. And what we're finding is that that is actually a greater harm to our community because it takes away the ability for individuals who weren't necessarily caught with drugs and driving. It was a matter that they have a drug or even an alcohol offense without the driving aspect, and their license gets suspended for 6 months. That means they can't take their kids to school. That means they can't take their kids to a doctor. That means that they can't take their kids to any sort of activity that is benefiting them, that may affect their ability to be able to go to work, to be able to drive. And these are just additional financial costs that this imposes on those who are less financially able to respond to that. So what we're going to be promoting is the fact that we don't want that to be an automatic. Now, obviously, the courts have within their discretion, if there is something that is related to driving, you have the drunk driving and drug driving charges that will take care of that. So we're asking for those to be removed and for the laws to be changed so that we could more properly keep our communities safe as well as employed and make them active contributors. I'm now going to pass off to my colleague from Alexandria, Brian Porter. We have Brian who's trying to participate by telephone. If I may suggest, we'll pass off to Amy Ashworth, our colleague from Prince William County and City of Manassas.
Thank you, Birta, and thank you for everyone for joining in on this very worthy cause today. I am going to speak about minimum mandatories that are sprinkled throughout the code section for various crimes. Our job as prosecutors is to do justice, and doing justice means looking at each case individually and deciding what the right thing to do is in each case. And that often includes making a recommendation as to what punishment is appropriate in each individual case. And judges and prosecutors need that discretion in each case to impose a sentence that is fair and just for each individual case. And too often in our system, mandatory minimums are used as a tool to kind of force defendants into taking a plea and not taking the risk of going to trial where there is a minimum mandatory that could be imposed. As prosecutors, if we're going to proceed with a case, we ought to do it on the evidence. We ought to do it on the facts and circumstances of each individual case and not rely on minimum mandatories to force people into taking a plea that they may not otherwise have taken. And that's one of the points that I am supporting in our coalition today. And now I'm going to pass it off to Brian. Perhaps he has secured his microphone. Brian? Not yet. So now I will pass to Parisa Tafti in Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, my fellow Commonwealth attorneys, and thank you, senators. I am thrilled that we are engaged and that we're engaged together at this moment to make real change in the Commonwealth and to lead the nation. I come from the perspective that not every social ill should be a crime, that not every crime has to result in punishment that involves incarceration, and that not every punishment should be so long and so onerous that it leaves no room for rehabilitation. And to that end, one of the proposals that I support is the proposal to codify deferred dispositions. And that proposal is a clear message to judges that they have the authority to delay imposing a conviction in order to give a person a chance to mitigate the harm that they've done. As a practical matter, for people with mental health issues, addiction, young people who've made stupid mistakes, or people involved in cases that would benefit from restorative justice, it means that they can have an opportunity to make things right to get services, and to get back on track, and either end up with no conviction at all or a conviction for something less serious than they would have otherwise ended up with. The bottom line is that reform is about the entire machinery of the criminal legal system, and it can be very easy for somebody to get caught up in that machinery. This proposal is a way for us to push pause and offer real opportunities for rehabilitation and fairness. And I will pass it on. Should we try Brian again? Oh, I see Brian's off, so I'm going to pass it to Steve. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, they can hear you. Go ahead.
okay, well, first of all, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties. The city of Alexandria's internet service is down, so I'm doing the best I can. But more importantly, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak today. I want to thank the caucus for its leadership on these important issues, and I'll just talk briefly about expungement. There's a situation in Virginia where someone could be convicted of a crime almost a lifetime ago, and still there's no meaningful way they could ever address having that conviction either removed or hidden on their record. So that's one of the things that I think our group is very fired up about. There needs to be a meaningful way for people who have paid their debt to society and moved on and become or remained really engaged people in the community to be able to have that conviction officially removed from their record. And one other component of this is that currently under Virginia law, people who are given the ability to avail themselves of a first offender statute or a suspended imposition of sentence often are ineligible for an expungement, even if the case is ultimately dismissed, because the code sections require the person to either plead guilty or stipulate to facts sufficient, which would render them ineligible for expungement under the current expungement regime in the Virginia Code. So this is a two-prong attack. We need to have a meaningful way to let people who have paid their debt to society have their records cleaned up so that they can avail themselves of educational, housing, and employment opportunities. And we also need to have a way to allow people who do qualify for first offender or suspended imposition of sentence to have those charges ultimately removed from their record after they successfully completed that disposition. Can I thank everybody? And I will pass it on to the next speaker now. I've lost my place on the agenda, so I'm not sure who's next. But thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Brian Porter from Alexandria. Hi, everyone. This is Steve Descano from Fairfax County. And I want to thank the members of the delegation and my colleagues for being here today to talk about these important issues. As the only actor in the criminal justice system that is directly accountable to the people, the Commonwealth's attorney has the duty to bring the values of the community into the courthouse. And the way that we do that is through our prosecutorial discretion in terms of how we deal with cases that come across our desks. And that has really been the bedrock of our system for a long time, and for decades, that has gone unquestioned. But over the last few years, as more and more communities have elected reform-minded prosecutors, we've seen more and more judges around the state ignore that and look for loopholes in the law to try to thwart their elected Commonwealth attorneys and therefore thwart the will of the people. We've seen it when Commonwealth attorneys try to handle misdemeanor marijuana cases in the past. We've seen it when we have prosecutors who want to take a more rehabilitative approach. And we've seen it every time that we've tried to take a step to really get at the root of systemic problems that we're all talking about here today. Allowing that to continue to go on makes our criminal justice system less democratic, less reflective of the community, and essentially ignores the fact that elections have consequences even in the criminal justice system. The only way to make sure our community's values are heard in the courthouse is to clarify the roles of the prosecutor so that we can act independently and reflect the values of our community. And that's why I'm so grateful for the work that the Senate Democrats are doing now and are going to do during the special session. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to my friend from Henrico, Shannon Taylor.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning. I want to thank, again, all of my wonderful colleagues who are on this call, for those who were able to speak today and for those who were not able to speak today but who are a part of our group. And definitely to thank our friends in the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and the Senate Democratic Caucus for all of their hard work on this very critical topic. As prosecutors, our responsibility is to keep our communities safe. And that's being safe from being over-policed, safe from feeling law enforcement is treating you differently just because of your skin color, where you live, where you're from perhaps, but also safe in ways to try to find different ways instead of just policing to make people feel comfortable and safe. Which means we need to fund those mental health counselors, the social workers, the substance use programs, because they can make a significant contribution to keeping a community safe. Those should not be left to law enforcement, but rather to people with certain training and expertise. We need to invest in our youth by funding comprehensive year-round programs, providing structured recreational activities with emphasis on conflict resolution, health, nutrition, reading, writing, employment skills, culture, and history. And I don't know if you all can still hear me. I'm being told that there's a broken system. Can you hear me a little bit better now? So I apologize for that. But we need to institute reform, change police training with bias and sensitive training, and with de-escalation techniques. And we need to root out racism and white supremacy. We need civility review boards and opportunities for residents to express their concerns so that our public safety in our communities is going to be of the highest integrity. We need to make sure those who are privileged to have a badge and a gun are responsible in doing just that. We, prosecutors of all those individuals, recognize the need for law enforcement. When your business is broken into, when your loved one is hurt, we need law enforcement and those opportunities to catch the real bad guys. And we work closely with law enforcement when they are playing that vital role of safety. But we also know that reform is essential, like we've been talking about today. And we appreciate partnering with the VLBC and the General Assembly to change the laws to create needed reforms. We can and are making changes in our offices and our communities, but we recognize it is the work of the General Assembly that will make sure there are real, long-lasting, and overdue change actually happening. As we go from here and we're working on change in our offices and instituting the concrete reforms, we are dedicated to progress and reform and working with our communities to make the changes they want. But we're also eager to work with our partners here to build those communities where everyone feels safe and that the officers are indeed the peace officers we all envision and justice is truly mine. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak today.
Okay, we want to thank all of you for joining us here today, and thank you so much for partnering with us in wanting to make changes to our criminal justice system and police reform. Christina, I will kick it over to you to now take questions from the media.
Yep, that sounds good. So we have a number of partners from the press corps who are on the line. I know that there were a couple of questions submitted ahead of time, and so we can go ahead and perhaps get to one of those. I know Gordon Morse wanted to ask a couple of questions about how the group came together, so I'm going to pull him live first. Gordon, are you there? You might have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Oh, there you are.
I'm unmuted. Yeah, so I'm just curious how this came to pass, how it was organized, and just generally what the sort of bottom line is for all of you. I mean, I don't remember anything like this being created before.
All right.
Is that question?
I love to talk and everybody's quiet all at the same time. I will just say, Gordon, that I think as you know, as bold as we all are in our own individual localities, we recognize that there is a time where you have to unify around issues. You have to unify around transformative change. And you have to realize that when a nation awakens to some of the things that many of us grapple with and deal with on a daily basis, there is a need for us to stand up as a unit and call for that transformative change and unify with whoever is going to do the work of the people. And, you know, interestingly, this group came together organically. Many of us, you know, are friends because we have been doing this work of transformative change. And many of us are friends and are associates because they ran on a platform of transformative change. And so it's very easy to find each other. It happened organically, and our ranks are growing by the day because those of us who were not, automatically in that thread are coming to the fold and saying, I must be a part of this transformative change as well. So as interesting as it may be, or you may find it, this happened very organically just because we are committed on a daily basis to doing this work of transformative change and of calling out the systemic injustices that have been happening and doing this, this difficult work of, fighting every single day. And that brings us together.
And I would just add, I think Stephanie said it perfectly, but there's power in numbers. And as she has said, as we have found each other and there's more of us who are like-minded, that is what is giving us this ability to have this much needed platform.
Hey, this is Senator Servell. Can I also just point out, we also had a change in partisan control in the legislature last year, and we had a whole new series of policies that were being advanced in both chambers. And, historically, we found ourselves at loggerheads a lot often with some of these proposals with the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys. And as we proposed some of these new ideas, we found some new support, some new people who were elected. And we found that we had common ground with a lot of these folks. Well, basically all these folks are on the line today. And so I think as we've continued to move forward in our policy changes, I think we've begun to come together, and that's what you're seeing right now as a result of that.
Thank you, panelists. I'm gonna kick it over to Alan Suderman next with the Associated Press. Alan?
Yeah, hi. Piggybacking on
Oh, can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thanks, Alan. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback off something Senator Servell said. A lot of criminal justice advocates were pretty disappointed with what happened.
It may be me, Christina, but I still can't hear.
Alan, you are a little faint. Can you speak up a little into the microphone?
A lot of criminal justice reform advocates were unhappy with what happened during this year's legislative session. They thought a new Democratic majority would be more receptive to some of the bills that they wanted that ultimately failed. What happened there, and why did it take the death of George Floyd and others to get to this point?
I think I can answer that. So, Alan, I think your question was that a lot of criminal justice.
Scott, could you repeat the question? I could not hear
Yep.
it.
Thank you. I was doing that. Yeah. So, I think what he said was during the session, a lot of criminal justice reform advocates were disappointed with the lack of progress during this session, and he was asking what happened there, and if we could speak to that. I think is basically what the question was. And what I would say is a couple things. Is first of all, I think the Senate has been advancing some of these reform measures that are part of both our package and what the Commonwealth attorneys are talking about here, both under Democrat and Republican control in the state Senate. Some of them, not all of them, but so the Senate has been trying to do reforms now for a while, and historically the House of Delegates Criminal Justice Subcommittee was under Republican control, basically wouldn't hear any of it. And this last session, we took control and we advanced some of those same policies, and I think there's a whole bunch of new members over there, both in the body and on the committees. And I think these reform efforts are a new policy to them. And I think there was a feeling among some of them that they wanted to go a little slower and take a little harder look at things and have the Crime Commission look at a few things instead of adopting them. And I think the pace was really more of an issue than the policy. So we're hopeful that with what's occurred in the last 3 or 4 months that has shown a light on what's been going on nationally and in Virginia, even just in the last 2 weeks, as our caucus chairman pointed out with the Fairfax County State Trooper video, that a lot of folks will be eager to move along a little faster now.
Thank you, Senator. I guess we'll kick it over to Ned Oliver with the Virginia Mercury.
Hello. Can you all hear me okay? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is for any of the prosecutors that have dealt with this. So why do you think it's important that prosecutors have greater access to police disciplinary records and personnel records? I'm just curious, like what kinds of records your offices have sought, why you were seeking them, and what the response from the local departments was.
So one of the things that we do not get access to is personnel issues such as complaints for use of force or for integrity issues unless it's a founded case. And as we found out in the George Floyd murder, that that particular officer had at least 17, 18 prior disciplinary complaints concerning force of action or force of abuse and things of that nature. So what we do not want is to have an officer on the force that we know has a pattern of behavior that we could have prevented that officer from being on the streets prior to someone being hurt. And so as the chief law enforcement officer, we want to be preventative instead of being in a position where we have to respond only after that information is released to us because something traumatic has now happened to our community. So that's why we want that information.
I would add that even under some circumstances, that evidence is what we need required by law. If we're talking about a law enforcement officer who's engaged in several use of force issues, and then we're talking about a case that's actually in court, that would be our responsibility, just like my colleague Anton Bell said, that we need to know that information because that is going to impact our judgment on whether or not that is a case that should be going forward. And right now, the only times that we are learning about internal affairs conclusions is if it bears on truthfulness, veracity, things that we know that are clear cut for purposes of challenging one's credibility on the stand. But even then, when an officer is given the opportunity to resign, that's one of the other things we've been talking about, we may not be aware of that. And certainly when that officer may be going to a different police division, they may not be aware of that.
Thank you very much. We're going to kick it over to Whitney Evans next with Virginia Public Media. Whitney, you should be able to go ahead and unmute yourself. Are you there, Whitney? I think, oh, there we go.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So I was just curious thoughts from prosecutors and lawmakers on defelonizing assaults on officers and how big is this problem?
I think I should probably start with that. So, Whitney, I thank you for the question. We've been getting a lot of questions about that one because some Fox News and some others glommed onto that when the first press release came out and generated some questions. First of all, there was a couple articles that came out today, one in the Roanoke Times, another one in the Virginia Mercury, which I think laid out some of the more sort of what I think most people would believe were shocking examples of when this charge is brought. For example, there was a situation where a woman was recently released from a mental health facility, went to a Dunkin' Donuts and ran into two off-duty police officers and asked them for help, and an argument ensued, which resulted in them being struck by an onion ring, throwing her into a glass window and charging her with 2 counts of assault on a law enforcement officer and making a bomb threat. Nobody would ever think that an onion ring would get you a felony charge with a 6-month mandatory minimum sentence, but that's the law in Virginia and has been since 1997. And these mandatory minimums are exactly what the problem is, or one of the big problems we need to deal with. 70% of the charges that are brought in these circumstances do not involve any type of injury to a law enforcement officer. 70%. And just so we're clear, nobody is talking about getting rid of malicious prosecution for somebody that causes a serious injury to a law enforcement officer. That is the law, will always be the law, and that felony will always be available if an officer suffers a serious injury. Nobody's talking about getting rid of that. What we're talking about is situations where there's no injury, where nobody's hurt, where the officer isn't hurt, where there's no touching involved, most people would be shocked to think they get you a felony with a 6-month sentence. I would also point out that over the last 5 years, I think 11,000 Virginians have been charged with this. That's 11,000 people charged that would have otherwise been a felony before 1997. So it would have been a misdemeanor before 1997. And 30% of those charges, according to state police or the Virginia Sentencing Commission's data, resulted in either acquittals or charges that were dropped. A lot of them were just dropped because these are charges that probably should not have been brought. This is the only offense on the books where the police officer is both the victim, the investigating officer, the main witness, and makes the charging decision. Basically, all of the checks and balances that normally accompany a charge don't exist in these scenarios, which is why you get a lot of these charges that probably shouldn't be brought. And a lot of people believe that these charges are often brought when an over-aggressive arrest situation happens, because it makes it impossible for somebody to hold an officer accountable. So it's a really bad policy that we think needs to be revisited.
Whitney, I'm Joe Morrissey. Scott is a little bit more circumspect than I'll be. The charges are brought and they're overcharged and they're charged as felonies, and when they should either not be charged at all or it's a clear case of misdemeanor, it's a misdemeanor offense. Also, the charges are brought when the police officer suspects that he may be charged himself with excessive force. So the onus is on the chief law enforcement officers, the prosecutors, to review those charging instruments and make sure that a felony assault on a police officer is in fact that, where there's a breach of skin or something like that. So thanks for that question, Whitney. Probably more directed, or should be directed, to the chief prosecutors who actually have a say in it.
Yeah, Whitney, this is Shannon Taylor from Henrico. To follow up on what Senator Morrissey said, I was interviewed for the story that Senator Surville was referring to, and I had pulled some data within Henrico and had 177 felony assaults that were 134 of those were reduced from the, and this is from 2017 to present. And so 75% of them were already being resolved in the very, very beginning. But to that exact point, the way that Virginia is set up, we have all of our decision-making, I say all of it, but a majority of that decision-making being done by law enforcement on the street. Prosecutors are reacting to that, which is different than we see in some other states where we are much more involved in whether or not a case goes forward earlier on. I think what's more concerning is the fact that this is a felony charge that does carry mandatory time. So then we're concerned about how that person's being evaluated for whether they'll be released or not. Because again, that is a step that happens before the arraignment, before prosecutors get in. So we are all in agreement with in working on this endeavor and addressing all of the concerns that both Senator Surville and Senator Morrissey have pointed out.
And let me add really briefly, you know, we have to have this conversation about living in two different societies. You know, there's one world that police and law enforcement and those who have power get to live in, and then there's another existence where those who do not have power, they don't have money, and they don't have status or a voice have to live in. And when we have members of our community who have assault incidents that aren't taken seriously, there are no law enforcement responding, they have to go through this extended magistrate process to try to protect themselves. But then we have law officers who get hit with an onion ring, and all of a sudden you have felony charges. That is a complete mixed match in existence, and that should never be. Just as when there is accountability every single day for the regular members of our community, and there is usually no accountability for law enforcement or either self-accountability for prosecutors and members of my profession to make sure that everyone is protected in the same way, we really have to have this conversation about why this is, and we really must do everything that we can to stop this from happening. And so, you know, there's really not that great of an issue with people assaulting law enforcement to the degree that it's so dangerous that we must have this type of circumstance where there's clearly a misdemeanor type behavior that's treated as a felony. Nothing is going to happen in terms of safety if we make this change. The only thing that will happen is that our community members can begin to trust us a little more to make sure that they're living in the same existence that other people who have power and position have.
Christina?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Senator. Yeah, we can hear you. You're a little choppy.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm on a cell phone. I apologize. But the comment I have is that, you know, you in any kind of a situation of arrest and there's resistance and perhaps an officer gets in some way or another elbowed, slapped, something happens, there's still 2 years available there to sentence somebody in 2 separate misdemeanors. But felonies ruin lives. I hear all the time from constituents who just can't get a job. They can't function well in society. It impacts their wives, their children, their ability to family. It leads to social services activity and spending on them. And it is something that if you don't need a felony to make a point, don't make that point. A misdemeanor works just fine.
All right, thank you, Senator, and thank you to our Commonwealth attorneys. We have a number of folks still in the queue, and it's 11:46 already. So I'm gonna kick it over to Jackie DeFusco next with 8 News. Let's see, Jackie, you should have talking permitted now. Go ahead.
Hello. Okay, good. For the Commonwealth attorneys on the call, I'm wondering if there are any proposals that you have seen out of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus or from Senate Democrats that give you pause that you don't fully support, or would you consider yourselves in complete alignment with the caucus at the time?
So I'll say this without getting into the trenches of every exact piece of purported legislation. I think what we're in alignment with is transformative change. I think we are all very tired of the incremental change that has failed us and has failed our community members for so long. And, you know, the effort is there. And I believe the intention is to really create a situation where we're trying to undo so many harms that have been done for so long and do as much as possible, as quickly as possible, with the intent on pushing forward to do more change and a commitment to continue to create this transformative change. And so I think we are all in favor of the spirit of the work that is being done, because we see that we are in alignment, in full alignment with this transformative change. So that's the best way I can answer, because there's so much to take in so quickly, but we are completely unified around transformative, non-incremental change so that we can save lives.
Yeah, also. I think Stephanie is absolutely right. I think the prosecutors, the Commonwealth's attorneys in this group believe in the principles that are put out there by the Black Caucus and the Senate Dems, and that transformative change is what we want. I also think it's useful to say that writing a letter and doing a press conference is not the only thing that we're going to do. We're committed to continuing to work with the delegation to make sure that our voices continue to be heard as these policy ideas are actually written into statute in the bills. So this is our commitment. It doesn't end today. It continues on with making sure that as these bills go down this path, that we're continuing to offer support and offer our thoughts as to what the best way to get these ideas to the finish line.
All right, we have Daniela Cheslow next with WAMU. So Daniela, you should be, you have talking permitted now, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I don't know if my audio quality is any good, but do you support reinstating parole?
Can I take that on real quick? So parole, I introduced legislation to study reinstating parole. I think Senator Edwards introduced legislation, who's the Judiciary Chairman is on the call here. He actually introduced legislation to reinstate parole. Both of those bills were referred to the Virginia Crime Commission to be studied, where they're going to be studied over the next 6 months, and then I believe looked at in the regular session, depending on what the Crime Commission says. which we're hopeful about. But that was not part of the plan for special session because that's a really big issue, and we were trying to focus on policies that we could get done in a week in a limited amount of time with a virus going on in a special session, and that's a big one. And Senator Edwards probably has something he'd like to say about that.
Yeah, I'm reading my Senate Bill 91. I'm very passionate about reinstating parole. It was 1995 that Bill Barr recommended to George Allen, the same Bill Barr that's now Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, and he recommended to George Allen, or George Allen got the information from Bill Barr, to go back and to abolish parole. So now you have to serve 85% of your time before you're even eligible for parole. And that hasn't done us any good. We've been locking too many people up for entirely too long. A little statistic is in the United States, we lock up 25% of the people in the entire world are locked up in some either federal, state, or prisons or in the jails. Yet we only have 4.4% of the world's population. And Virginia is one of the leaders in the states in locking people up for long periods of time. Another statistic is we lock up roughly not quite 700 people per 100,000 in Virginia. The EU, the European Union, average is 102 per 100,000. That's almost 700 compared to almost 100 the EU. We're way ahead of Russia and China and the other countries in the world in terms of the number of people we put in prison for long periods of time. When I was in the Marine Corps, I talked to my clients that said the first 30 days were the hardest. After that, it's pure boredom. We're not doing any good by just locking people up that don't need to be locked up for that long period of time. Go back to the parole system. It worked well. It worked fine. And I think that's what I'd like to do. And we're looking at that with the Crime Commission, along with earned sentence credit that the delegates got put in. And so I'm hoping we can do something at least by next winter. We'll see.
Thank you, Senator. All right, I think we'll go ahead and kick it over to Tyler Arnold next, who has his hand raised in the queue. He's with Center Square. So Tyler, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Christina, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry, Senator. I didn't realize you.
No, my fault. I was muted. First of all, we made progress last year on parole. Senator McClellan and I had a bill that gave fishback defendants automatic parole review, and that's starting right now, and that's a good thing. My question is, do all of the prosecutors that are on this Zoom conference now support, or is there anybody that does not support reinstating parole? John Edwards, I'm going to take that.
Which question do you want us to answer? Because you kind of posed it both ways. So do you want us to speak if we don't support it? Or do you want us to firmly state we do?
I want you to firmly say that you do support it or that you do not support it.
Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of Loudoun County, and I do support it for a couple of reasons. One is when we changed to the no parole, we never educated anybody, so when they were giving all those harsh sentences, it didn't get reconfigured for when there was no parole. So we do have people who are serving 10, 20, 30 years on some crappy charge, and because there's no parole, there's nobody to come back to be able to reset it. So yes, that should always be a consideration if somebody can take a look at the person, see what advances they've made to see if it is appropriate. So I do support it.
Thank you.
I support it in Portsmouth, Virginia.
And I support it in Henrico, and I'm going to ask you that when you do that, you have also got to make sure you've got the funding there for the housing, for the employment, for the mental health, because just having individuals come back to society without having any support is not going to be helpful, because we want everybody to come out here and having had their their responsibility to whatever actions, but we want to make sure that people are given the right resources to have that effective second chance, because we want everyone to succeed.
I'll piggyback off of that because I agree with Shannon. The resources are incredibly important. And I do support parole because I think that if the goal of our criminal justice system is rehabilitation, then we have to give people the opportunity to show that they are actually rehabilitated. Without having that opportunity to show that people are rehabilitated, that people can change, particularly younger people, not just minors, but younger people who are still developing their brains, that opportunity is parole. And without that opportunity, without the opportunity of parole, it puts prosecutors in an almost impossible situation where you have to, at a static point in time, almost guess as to whether or not this person is going to be a danger at some other fixed point in the future. Because what we have to remember is that we put people in jail and prison, not because we're mad at them, but because they're a safety risk, or at least that's what we should be doing. And without the mechanism of parole, it is very, very easy and almost forces prosecutors to get away from that idea and the system to get away from the idea that rehabilitation is even possible. So I do support parole, and I'm glad and happy for the progress that was made during this last session, and I look forward to working with you all on advancing it in future sessions.
I piggyback off of Steve. As long as the mechanisms are in place so that we're not doing a guessing game, because the last thing we want to do is release someone and they go back out there, particularly when you're dealing with those who've been convicted of murder and rape, and they get out and then they go back out there and another murder or a rape takes place. Because at that point, that blood is on our hands. And so if those mechanisms are in place to ensure we're not doing a guessing game, then I have no problem with that.
From Arlington County and the city of Falls Church, I support parole for the reasons that everyone said. But also from a purely economic standpoint, it makes sense to provide services within the community for people rather than locking them up. It's just a more cost-effective way of dealing with things. And you also want to give people an opportunity to have hope so that they understand that rehabilitation actually matters. And you can't do that if there is no possibility of release.
And in Prince William County, in the city of Manassas and Manassas Park, I also support reinstating parole. As Parisa just said, you need to have a robust system to make sure we're not releasing dangerous people. So the parole board needs to be, have a responsible way for reviewing all these cases, but we can't just throw human beings away after they commit a crime. Again, each case is individual, and justice means looking at each case individually and doing the right thing.
Can I just add one thing about, the economics of this? When we fund incarceration the way that we are now, we are not able to fund education. We are not able to fund food and housing security. We are not able to meet the basic needs of our community members who are struggling, when in fact, as a society, we should be thinking about how we help our community members thrive. And so we should always think during this conversation about when we fund one thing and we overfund something, where we're going to be lacking in providing for the people who need us to provide for them.
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to go ahead. We're going to take two last questions. We've got Taylor Arnold with Center Square, and then we're going to kick it over to Marie Alvages after that with the Daily Press, and then we'll wrap up. So we're pushing on the hour, so we want to make sure we're getting to everybody. So Tyler, it's over to you.
Thank you. With the state ending its ban on public sector collective bargaining, are lawmakers considering any laws to restrict police unions' ability to negotiate disciplinary rules or any other rules that could potentially that could prevent policies that could potentially impede police accountability?
Tyler, this is Scott Survell. That's not part of the Senate Democratic Caucus's plan. I don't know what the House of Delegates is proposing because they haven't proposed anything yet. So you might want to address your question to them, but at least as part of our plan, it's not part of our plan.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm just going to kick it over to Marie Alvages real quick. Marie, you're live.
Yes, hi, thank you. You guys talked about the importance of prosecutors being able to view police personnel records and use of force records, but I don't know that I've seen any specific proposals to change the FOIA law by requiring those records to be released to the public because right now it's permissive. So can anyone speak to whether they support something like that?
Was that, sorry, Marie, was your question about broadening FOIA to be able to access disciplinary records?
Yes, to make it public, because right now my understanding is that it's permissive and that the locality can decide
Right.
whether or not they release that.
Right. Expanding the FOIA, or actually restricting the FOIA exemption, is something that we talked about as a caucus. We also talked about having the FOIA Commission thoroughly vet that before we explore it on the floor of the legislature. There's 400 and plus law enforcement agencies out there that hits in different ways, and we were concerned about the complexity of it sort of overwhelming a special session. But at least getting those records to Commonwealth attorneys so that they can be able to see them as part of their decisions they have to make. It's a much more restricted proposal, and that was something I think that we can talk about, but opening it up to the whole world is a little bit more complicated. So I'm sure there's members that support it, but I'm not sure that right now it's sort of, the support is gelled enough for us to consider it in a special session.
All right, thank you all so much. Senator Locke, over to you for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you also very much, and we want to certainly thank our Commonwealth attorneys for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your partnership. We appreciate all of you for joining us here today. We appreciate the press for joining us, and we thank all of you who joined us here on this call and listening to us today. And we look forward to moving forward